Okay, so adding color to your photos after you've distressed them and they've dried. Now you can come in and start adding colors back into them, either using the same color palette or different color palettes. And any water-based material will work. So I've got some acrylics set up here, I've got some markers, I've got some watercolors, and I've got some watercolor crayons. And I'm going to show you how each one of those work. So this one here, we'll start with our owl. And so this was the one that we did on the traditional paper, as you can see, because it's really scratched and etched into. So I'm going to come in and add some watercolor. And let's see here, get some orange. I'm going to come right in and spread that color. Now the watercolor is transparent, so you can still see all those great marks that you've made underneath. And then I'll add some more color over here, adding some water onto my brush to spread the color. And let's add another color in here. Let's add some blue. So now I've got this fun color variation in the background here. Got the surface nice and scratched up. I've added water to it. I'm going to leave this guy as is. And in terms of adding color, I'm going to stop at this point and I'm going to move on to another photo. It's nice to work with multiple photos because what that does is it stops you from overworking one too much, and don't feel like you have to apply all the techniques to every single one of your photos. Certain photos are going to need more work, others will need less, and so there's no obligation to implement all of these techniques onto every single photo. Each photograph will be different. I'm going to stop at this point with this guy and put him to dry. Now this here is the photo that I printed on the kiosk, and so that's that paper that's pretty tough. I'll show you here when I add watercolor to it. It's going to go onto the areas where I sanded. See that? But I don't know if you could see this that well, but the surface doesn't absorb the watercolor the same way that the emulsion surface does. So I'm just painting on top of this and it's just sitting on the surface. There's nothing to absorb it. So I'm just going to wipe that off. So watercolors aren't going to necessarily be your go-to for this process. But you could come in and play with some markers, and any water-based marker, as I mentioned, will work. This is just a Sharpie. You can use that to color in. Now, highlighters are fun because you can go over parts of your image and it doesn't cover it up completely. You can use your finger to help you blend your markers in, just like so. Mr. Sketch, remember them? They all smell nice. So here I am, dry photograph that I'm putting the markers onto. And then nice little blending with my fingers. And now that edge that I sanded, it's going to receive the photo. The photo is going to receive the color rather differently along those edges. So it creates a nice little visual frame. So that the colors kind of gotten down into the grooves of where that was sanded. So that's framed off, and maybe what I'll do now is come into that edge a little darker with a different color, blend, and blend. So that's with the markers on the kiosk paper. Okay, set that aside. Let's clean up a little bit here. Okay, now acrylics. Acrylics are the best option for the kiosk paper, but you can use it on any paper really, and it's definitely more heavy bodied, so it can get onto any surface nicely. And let's see here, I've got some colors laid out over here. And what I'm going to do is just paint into that background. Just like a note here on, you know, when you are photo altering. I don't always go in with a plan of exactly what I'm going to do to the photo. Sometimes I'll just grab a stack of photos that I've taken recently and just start to play. Yeah, certain photos might, you know, come along with more specific ideas, but I just kind of allow myself that creative freedom just to get in there and start messing around and seeing what comes out. So you don't have to have the inspiration prior to get in there and start working. So if you're feeling like, oh, I don't know what to do, don't let that hold you back. I oftentimes feel that creativity creates creativity. So if you're just making and doing, it's all going to happen, and it's going to happen more and more as you go. Rather than if you're feeling a little intimidated and you don't do it, it's just really more pause creates pause. So you don't end up feeling like, okay, whatever, it's just paint, I can paint over it if I don't like it, or okay, it's just watercolor, I can wipe it off if I don't like it. You know, it's all fixable. It's paint. Don't be scared. And that lends to the notion of working in multiples too. If you get stuck on one image, you don't quite know what you want to do with it, set it aside and move on. You'll find one that does talk to you. Love turquoise and red together. More white. A nice white craft paint is helpful too for making your paints more opaque. So if you find that your paints aren't covering the way that you'd like them to, you could still see a lot of the background, add more white to it. And I find that the craft paints versus the artist quality paints have a lot more tooth to them, meaning that like when they dry, the surface is a little more chalky. I personally like that. You know, if you're painting and want a shiny finish when you're all done, then that's not going to appeal to you. But in the processes that I do, because I'm constantly mixing all my mediums together, a nice toothy surface is perfect, because then when that's dry, come in and I can add pencil and markers back on top, and it just kind of helps do some prep work for you. Add some more colors in here. Maybe I'll add some purple. One more white. Pop that out a little more. Oh, there we go. Thumbprint. Get rid of that. And a more decorative. Fun. Love painting on photos. Another thing that I love, where did I put them? Is glitter. So here, got some glitter, which I'm totally gonna add to this photograph. Gonna embellish the stars. And the lights. And then I'm sure I'm gonna come into this once it's all dry, into this blue area and do something else. But for now, here, I'll give him a little glitter in his eye. And maybe a little more up here. Dots, dots, dots. Uh-oh, somebody stop me. I'm getting crazy with the glitter. Just a couple more, and then I'm stopping. Okay, I'll let that, put that aside to dry, and since I've got all this acrylic out, I am gonna add it to some of these other photos. Get a good brush here. Okay, let's see. A little more contrast. Okay, I'm gonna let that one dry. Now another fun thing to do is keeping the whole cycle of your creations flowing. So photograph pages or photos that you've already embellished and then continue the process of embellishing. So here's a photo from an art journal. Here's a photo of an altered photo I did recently. So now, keeping that process going forward and using up some of this acrylic, let's add some colors. I'm gonna come in over there. I'll cover up some of this. And maybe adding some marker. Okay, I'm gonna let that acrylic dry. Set it aside. Okay, now this guy here, I'm gonna use some watercolor crayons. These are the Caran d'Ache Neo Arts. I've literally had them forever. They last forever. So a good set of watercolor crayons is definitely worth the investment because you will have it a long time. I just dipped this into a little bit of water just to soften up the surface, and come in and start coloring. Then just with a wet brush, I'm working that into the surface. This was the photo that was printed with the traditional photo process, which is why I've got such great surface texture happening in this one, if you remember. So wet brush, mixing the watercolor crayon all around. Now I'll come in a little blue. Spread that with the wet brush also. Blend. Find that you have too much color, it's a water-based crayon, so just, you could either pull it off with a wet brush or a paper towel. You can make it as subtle or as saturated as you like. I'm gonna stop this one at this point. Now you could get the point of why I go into my edges first with the sandpaper, because again it creates a nice tooth marking into the paper that really absorbs whatever materials I apply to the surface. I get that nice frame. Alright, we'll let you dry. And we've got these fellas. Trying not to create such a glare for the camera here. Now, also you have the little mini Caran d'Aches, which are fun to work with. These guys here. What is that one? The Near Colors. Also, they're just a smaller version than those big ones. Again, I just dip it in water first just to get that pigment moving and apply. You could also experiment by, instead of using a wet brush, using a dry brush to move your pigment around. See how you like that. If you're looking to keep that saturated color rather than washing some of it away. So now that's just moving around. Over here, this is a shot from the same day. You could see what I did was with the watercolors. I added it into the area where I sanded it, and then came in with markers to color in the boardwalk here in different colors to enhance. So you're mixing all of your materials together. So we have the watercolor crayons. I can come in with some marker, blend with my finger, or blend for a more subtle look with a wet brush. Could come back in if I want to build that back up. So it's really just a matter of playing with these combinations. Acrylics can be added at this point too, if you want to mix the acrylics and the watercolors together. Again, the acrylics are going to give you a more opaque look than the watercolors. Set that guy aside.